Man City 0, Spurs 4. Blimey O'Reilly. Jim Campbell, even as an Arsenal fan, you bloody enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, I was conflicted, obviously, but I did manage to compartmentalise it.
You did.
An unbelievable display.
Yeah.
Two unbelievable displays.
Yeah, well,
conjoining to make this madness.
It was, yes. And of course, Man City fans might say, well, why do you dislike it? It's just because you've been winning.
Yeah.
If you know, I don't know, Wolves go on a crazy one and win 4 Premier League titles in a row, we'll dislike them as well. That's just how it works.
Well, it's also whenever it happens to one of the big boys, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Anywhere.
It's an outstanding result, despite the fact that perhaps we should have seen it coming. I mean, Man City have lost 5 games in a row for the first time since 2006. But, I mean, it's not a 2-1 lot.
The manner of it is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, the first time Pep has lost a home game by 4 goals as well.
Yeah, I mean, what was really stark about it was how much space Tottenham managed to find. And obviously, they did a really good job of creating that space themselves. But City are generally so good at limiting that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the injuries play a big part in that. Not having Rodri and not having Kovacic to step in as well is a massive thing. And obviously, you know, they've got 5 players out. So there's Ruben Dias, Oscar Bob, and Jeremy Doku out alongside those other 2. But it's also players are getting back to fitness as well, aren't they? So you've got De Bruyne coming back to fitness. Grealish has been out. Nathan Ake's been out as well. So like it has massively disrupted their rhythm. But I'm surprised that it was to this degree.
Yeah. Andy, do you think that the Man City board now are kind of regretting giving Pep that extension? Because it would be more difficult to get rid of him should they see that as an option.
I think the striking thing about this whole Man City situation at the moment is the fact that it's almost as if it's a child-designed caricature of Manchester City being bad. So, you know, they've had their difficulties with Tottenham in the past, unlike with most other teams, unlike with better teams, if we're being perfectly honest. This seems a caricature of their difficulties against Tottenham, as if an 8-year-old made up what was going to happen. And I think the other thing is that the way they are at the moment generally it really reminds me of 1920 already, because not only have Liverpool flown out the traps as they did in 1920, I think it's reminded me a lot, the opening part of this season, about how Manchester City let Liverpool get away by their own stumbles. Now, you go back and you actually look at the numbers, and it was a historically poor start for Manchester City in the modern context. Because in 1920 they'd lost more points by December than they had in either of the previous 2 seasons, which shows you their relentless standards. And I think this stumble at the moment again underlines their relentless standards. But of course, in 1920, Liverpool were even better in that first part of the season than they have been here under Arne Slot. And the other thing is, City didn't lose anywhere near as many games as they have in this little spell. Although obviously we're adding the Champions League game and the Carabao Cup game against Spurs, which I think if you take it on its own, it doesn't really matter that much, particularly when you look at the team they put out there. So there is a strong sense of deja vu attached to this, I think.
I quite enjoy how you just refer to it as 1920 straight away, because I was thinking to myself, well, myself and the history buffs know that West Brom won the league in 1920.
Well, yeah. But Man City did have a really bad start, as you well know, as everyone knows.
Ended up finishing 7th in 1920.
Well, yeah.
But of course, in 2019-20, what Andy was referencing was an interesting comparison. I mean, it's where do you begin? But I think focusing on Spurs to begin with is probably the right thing, and specifically James Maddison scoring a brace on his birthday.
Oh, imagine the roast on Sunday.
Well,
brace at the Etihad on your birthday.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, even in I think it was on Instagram, Jude Bellingham got involved and was like, top class, or whatever he said, because they're pals, aren't they? But what an afternoon he had, Jim, because, you know, Andy's right to highlight all those things. But when Maddison's in that form, finding those pockets of space.
Yeah, absolutely, which, again, is what City are so good at restricting you from, and he absolutely thrived in that. And that second goal in particular was such a brilliantly worked move, so good, and such a confident, dinked finish. Yeah, and we were talking last week, weren't we, about him, struggling to get into the team. I know Kulusevski has made it difficult for him, and he comes and just shuts certain podcasts up. Yeah, don't worry, we will keep banging on.
Get him in the England squad. That's what we're going to say now. But yeah, that was quite something. But I mean, yeah, when Pedro Porro scores as well, for a minute when he celebrated, it felt like a muted celebration. I was like, Did he come through the recount? Oh no, he wasn't. It wasn't amused to celebrate. I think he was surprised and he was thinking VAR's going to pull me up for something, surely. And then when it became apparent that wasn't the case, then he kind of joined in. And then obviously Brendan Johnson can't really help himself. But Spurs, I mean, they've been Jekyll and Hyde this season. It has been hit and miss, but with that you do get some hits. People often focus on the miss part of that turn of phrase, and they are up in sixth, just a few points off Champions League spots, of course. But Postecoglou, obviously they'd beaten Man City not that long ago, but surely when you're looking around and we know his philosophy, very attacking and so on, surely he thinks to himself, today's the day to get a famous result, because Man City have been struggling. They look so vulnerable at the back at the moment, and the midfield. You can see that it's so disjointed and it is not disciplined and energetic as we've come to know from them. And he picks that team and just goes, right, lads, let them have it.
Yeah. It was a really interesting clash of styles, wasn't it? Because I think, Ange Ball obviously won out, and this is probably the apex of it. This is the best kind of deployment of it we've seen. And also with City, the whole idea is that, though they play to the players' strengths, the players are so kind of multi-talented and so versatile that whoever is playing in the system, it should function, But that kind of collapsed entirely.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Andy, that Jim says there, that you would think that, okay, Rodri's not there, Kovacic is not there. Like, it shouldn't be this bad.
No, it shouldn't. And what City have been so good at down the years is replacing players who you think are irreplaceable. Now, we're talking about replacing those players in the short term at the moment. Yeah. So, if you don't have Rodri available, if you don't have Kovacic available, if you don't have De Bruyne available, etc., obviously it has an impact, but they've been good at sealing up those gaps in the recent past. I think the striking thing about City at the moment is that it's just the results, really, because if you look at the games in their entirety, apart from the game at Bournemouth, I think they were much worse in the game at Bournemouth than they were in this one. That's the one that really sticks in the mind, actually, because I think on the whole, City have actually been okay in these games. Even when they got whacked at Sporting, they were really, really good in the first half of that. Now, I know you can't, when you're talking about City standards, be saying, oh, we played well for 40 minutes in that game, or we played well for 50 minutes in that game, or whatever. But the thing that is so shocking about where they are at the moment is just such a lack of imprecision everywhere. I mean, you talked about the defence and the midfield. Up front as well, it's all really loose and careless. And, that comes with physical and mental fatigue. Now, going back to 1920, notwithstanding West Brom, we're going to park them for a minute because obviously they're the GOATs of 1920.
Indeed they are.
And that's why we've been thinking about them for the last 104 years. But if we look at that season, City just it felt like they were paying the price for everything they put in the seasons before, and it's just a physical and mental weariness, and that's where the lack of sharpness comes from. I think now, obviously, injuries contribute to that. But I guess that's sort of the thing that Guardiola is trying to promote.
Sort of a perfect storm, do you think?
Yes, I think so. And when Guardiola's kind of trying to promote it by what he's saying at the moment, and we've definitely been there before with him if we go back those 5 years, he says, and I think he's quite right to say, do you know how hard it is to keep up these standards for so long? What they have done has been absolutely extraordinary. But I think just because of gravity and for our sanity, it needs to slightly fall apart at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting to bring that point up, isn't it? Because it does feel like this is years and years and years of incredible work in their legs catching up with them. Phil Foden's a good example of that.
Yeah,
he's got 1 assist and 0 goals so far this season.
And he was rested quite a bit at the start.
I also think not replacing Julian Alvarez looks like it more and more just looks like a straight up mistake. I know it was very difficult for them to do that in a short period of time, but they are still light because of it.
I remember Andy saying at the time, to quote you to you, Andy, that when they sold Julian Alvarez, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said there may have been a bit of concern that he had played so much football that he would become fatigued quite soon, and they got a high price for him, so why not cash in?
Yeah, I think a great quote, firstly, Marcus. Secondly...
Normally I try and stitch you up with a quote, Andy, from yourself.
Yeah, but I think I think that's I would stick with that. But I think Jim's right. They're not missing Alvarez in current shape, and we've seen his very uneven efforts for Atletico so far. Not uneven efforts, uneven output, I think is probably better to say. But they're missing an Alvarez-shaped player, definitely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And that again is another layer of this shock about City. You expect them to be prepared for every eventuality, but I think if you look at the numbers on this game. If you look at it shows how misleading some of the base statistics can be, doesn't it? Because if you look at the possession in favour of City, you look at the fact they had 23 shots to 9. It makes it look like a game they should have won. Mm-hmm. Now, look, it's a game they could have got something out of, bizarrely, despite the fact it was 4-0. But it's not a game they should have won.
A game they shouldn't have lost 4-0 by.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's it. That obviously Johnson scores the fourth right at the end, but Haaland has chances, and Vicario had a good game as well. You've got to give credit to him.
What? I think Vicario was a big part in the second half when they were 2-0 up, because that felt like one of those examples where the old phrase people use about 2-0 being a dangerous score actually felt like it might be appropriate, because Vicario had a kind of come at me, bro, kind of attitude where he wanted to make saves. He was bang up for it.
Yes,
and he made a really great save from Erling Haaland in a 1-on-1, which led to a little bit of a ding dong between, I think it was Kevin De Bruyne and Sarr. And actually, City started to get a little bit frustrated then. And I thought Vicario kind of like he led really well. I think he probably transmitted a lot of confidence to his defenders by just being ready for that and kind of wanting it.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it is funny, isn't it, how sometimes these results can go. I mean, we say, well, they won. They were great value for the victory, Spurs. But, was it a 4-0 game? Well, I mean, not that they'll give two craps about that, of course. But yes, Man City still created and so on. And when you said, Andy, about some of their previous games, Man City against Sporting and Bournemouth, one or two others, if Foden tucks that one away at the end, not that it was an easy chance, but it's a chance we've seen him put away against Bournemouth, they get a point. Haaland scores a penalty against, but you start sort of, looking at all these things. They didn't, the start of that second half against Sporting, even Amorim said, well, you can't really legislate for that. There's all these things, but the fact is they are happening. But actually, just to focus on the 5 games in a row that they've lost, I think that's a slight fool's errand as well. If you extrapolate that a bit further, when Fulham went there, Fulham should have got something out of the game. The fact is that they were gettable. Wolves is another one. Okay, Man City found a way and all that. Arsenal, though. Arsenal.
Scored 2 goals against them when they had 11 men on the pitch.
Exactly.
Didn't happen very often before this season.
And I know Arsenal made it incredibly difficult, but the fact is they thought, actually, if we do this, we should be okay. And they nearly were in terms of winning. And there's other games, so they've not convinced this season. And what you were saying there, Andy, a little bit earlier, we haven't really seen them blink, or we haven't seen them stutter under Guardiola in these last sort of handful of seasons, which shows just how magnificent they have been on the pitch.
They've had runs of patchy form by their own standards, but this is unprecedented.
Yeah, okay. So last year, obviously, was it last year? Was it when there was a little bit of a stutter in Arsenal?
Around this time.
Yeah, and Arsenal, okay, fine. I take the point. Arsenal were a few points above them, or whatever it was. May have been up to 8. You did think, oh, is there a chance? And they came roaring back. Despite all this, Man City are still second, for crying out loud. It's only because Liverpool have been unbelievably good and unbelievably consistent that they are 8 points above them. But my point is, to sort of circle back round, is this may well be, and Man City could be laughing at these kind of comments come the end of the season, but it may well be, Andy, that we're finally here where, as you've mentioned before, the fatigue sets in, and that they don't have the kind of season that we've been completely accustomed to with Guardiola and Manchester City. We saw Klopp's Liverpool. They were less consistent than Man City, of course, still very, very good. But there was a season here and there where they finished 5th, for example, in his penultimate season. So we saw that, because to keep those standards and that intensity is very, very difficult. It's a bit like every empire comes to an end. But of course, at the time, you think, well, the Romans, they're taking care of business. This is not going to happen. But at some point, it kind of does. Now, I'm not saying that this is the end, but of this kind of dominant City. But if they were to have a season where they did finish 3rd or something, actually, in a weird way, it would almost kind of reinforce the incredible job what they've done, if you see what I mean.
Well, I think as well, at a time when the charges over City threaten to really damage the reputation of the Premier League, and I think that's something that's not really talked about often enough. What they're doing at the moment on the pitch is maybe promoting the myth of the Premier League, because we're looking at it and thinking, okay, we've talked about, and you talked about Liverpool just then and how exhausting it is to compete with City. Maybe we're overlooking the fact that for City it's very exhausting to compete with City.
It's red. That's what I mean. Well, of course they don't lose. That's in the bag.
Yeah,
that's settled.
And I think there has been a feeling in the last year or two that, you know, this is a bit worrying what's happening for the Premier League. You know, excellent as City are, I'm sure their fans have enormously enjoyed the last period, and why wouldn't they? It has felt a little bit that, you know, is the Premier League going in the same direction as the Bundesliga or Liga, where you've got one team that you know is going to win at the start of every season. And now we're seeing that actually doing that season after season after season in the Premier League is absolutely bloody exhausting. Yeah. And I think really the difficulty for City at the moment, say if this, as you say, extrapolates into, rather than being a little blip, if it extrapolates into a proper trend of them falling off, them not having the sort of season we expect in the Premier League. Now, look, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, say, they finished third in the Premier League and went on and won the Champions League. I think that's quite doable, for example.
He might have to prioritise in a way that maybe he hasn't done or hasn't overtly done before.
Yeah, and because the Champions League doesn't really stop this season, of course, because there are 8 games and it carries on in the group stage carries on into January, which will be really weird, by the way. I think that's something to look for. Definitely the thought that even the biggest clubs have to spare these efforts. But I think that the temptation must be to think, if they were to not win the Premier League, or they finish third or whatever, to think, right, okay, we have to have a complete root and branch. You know, we love that phrase in English football, don't we? Root and branch. But I think really it will be really important for them to stick to evolving rather than completely changing everything, because the bulk of the team is still absolutely phenomenal. The age profile of the team is pretty good. So, okay, you may be looking at, you know, losing a Kyle Walker here and a Ilkay Gundogan there, but they have to not cave to that temptation. Obviously, depending on what happens off the pitch, but say if things remain as they are and they're going for the same sort of prizes, I think that's the real challenge for Hugo Viana. How do you do what City have done in previous generations and freshen this squad and not overreact to what might be, if it turns out to be just one bad Premier League season?
Yeah, I think for the first time in a long time, January is really important to them, because for the first time in a long time, it's a personnel issue, and that's obviously entirely down to the injury of Rodri, and Matheus Cunha is an able deputy for a lot of games, but it's a big load for him to take. So I think, you know, that is the most immediate action they can take, and I'm sure they will.
Well, they need to freshen it up, and obviously getting players back from injury and so on would help immensely. So it remains to be seen whether this is just a blip or indeed this is a season in which they are not as dominant as they have been before. But going back to Spurs, if I may, it was a great afternoon for them. Do you see this as something that they're going to kick on from, or do you think that kind of Jekyll and Hyde hit and miss approach is going to be the case? Because, as I say, the way they kind of set up, and especially on the break, and Man City are open and vulnerable on the break, Spurs punished them. But how then do Spurs go on and say, right, this is not just a Haley's Comet kind of result?
I think the good Spurs is likely to be the Spurs we see more often than the bad Spurs going forward, if that makes sense.
It does,
they have weird defeats in them. The Brighton one in particular was absurd, really. Yeah. And that shouldn't have happened to them. But I by the nature of inconsistency, it's hard to pinpoint when and how it's going to change, isn't it? But
of course. But I realise I've asked you how long is a piece of string there, but what I thought about Spurs is there was maybe it was just me. There was a little bit more game management there in terms of you're up, okay, right now sit in there. You know, don't just kind of go and do the same thing, because the Brighton game is a great example when the tide turned, because they were brilliant in the first half of that. Yeah. Or they did concede a few chances, but still. when the tide turns, it's like, now what do we do? Whereas against Man City, there was an acknowledgement of, right, this is Man City. They're still a good side. They're still the champions, for crying out loud. So let's kind of manage this and see. So I don't know. I look, it's a result that gives them such a boost as well. I mean, the fact is, when 3 of their players on the 52nd minute of the game at the Etihad are doing a sort of Mario Kart celebration. I mean, it shows you just how much they were bloody loving it, you know. Yeah. So I suppose with Ange, if anybody's feeling a bit down or a bit gloomy, he just goes, "Oi, show them the celebration again. Come on, this is what we're capable of." But one player I do want to sort of mention about Spurs who hasn't been mentioned too much around this because he didn't score is Dominic Solanke and what he brings to the side and that energy and pressing. Obviously, he can score. We know he's a good finisher and stuff, but I think he's made a difference.
Yeah, he's a good link man, isn't he?
He is, yeah. But of course, due to
stay on the Nintendo theme.
Yeah, I like it. But we have to mention again Kulusevski, who's one of the best players in the league at the moment, for crying out loud.
Absolutely barnstorming stuff from him again.
It was. I mean, with him and Maddison in there as well, which was delightful. But Kulusevski, when he sort of strode forward, and I forget who he nutmegged at the Man City players, he is, if they can. You know, if they can just tighten up a bit here and there and so on, look at this Spurs side and you look at some of the players that they have and the way they're performing, you're like, I want him to have a great season. I mean, he is having an individual season, but in terms of a team, I want to see a player like Kulusevski playing, dare I even say, maybe Champions League football or certainly, next season go on and do something because he's been brilliant. And my goodness, as I say, going forward, they can be so exciting.
I've known you for 20 odd years. It's like it means nothing.
I would say, despite James Maddison, Kulusevski's hands down man of the match in this. He was unbelievable. And I guess if we rewind to when he first joined Spurs, and he was still technically a Juventus player, he was just on loan for them PSRs and what have you. That first half season he had at Spurs, when I don't think people were massively excited about his signing because he'd not really had the chance to show what he could do at Juventus. He was amazing. I mean, he absolutely took the Premier League by storm and spat out what it turned out and what it seemed probably at the time were a load of unsustainable numbers. But I think really we look at Spurs and we think, can they build this team around Son? Can they build this team around Maddison? It's the wrong question, really, isn't it? Because the most talented player is neither of those two. Kulusevski's absolutely phenomenal. And it reminds me fondly of when I took my godson, who's a big Spurs fan, to see them. And we were walking past a bar on the walk up the Seven Sisters Road. It was a karaoke bar, and there was a man standing on a table with his shirt off, singing along to Heaven is a Place on Earth by Belinda Carlisle, but with Kulusevski is the best on earth.
And it was Daniel Levy.
Exactly. Exactly, because I don't have to buy him again. I've already paid the money. Of course, that is the thing. It's one of those cliches about Spurs. It's quite damaging cliche about Spurs that they don't spend any money, and they have. They've been out there and they've spent a lot on Solanke, on Maddison, and the frustration is they're still a little bit short. Now, look, I think. I'm still not convinced, actually, and it seems weird saying this on a weekend when they've just gone 1-4-0 at Manchester City. I'm still not convinced that Ange Postecoglou is the man to take them to the next level.
I know what you mean.
What he has done is brought back a joy to watching Tottenham, which cannot be underestimated how important that is after Conte and Mourinho. But where I think Spurs are in a really good position, and you asked before about their consistency. The consistency, I'm not convinced. If they went in and put a terrible performance against Roma on Thursday, it would not surprise me at all, especially with Ranieri setting out a certain stall at the moment as he seeks to stabilise. But I think where Spurs have an advantage, and you were talking about Champions League there, Marcus, I don't think they're quite good enough to make the top four, especially with how good Chelsea have been so far this season. But what the advantage is going to be is this season, I think the Premier League will get that fifth Champions League place. And I think I would guess it's between Spurs and Villa. Now, it may seem like a small definition to make, but I would say Spurs are probably not quite consistent enough to get to fourth, but I could imagine them getting into fifth, and it may well turn out that's good enough for a Champions League place.
It might well do, Andy. It might well do. All right then, coming up after this, Stevie Coops has given his marching orders.
There is absolutely no way that I will walk away from this situation.
How long do you give Alex Smith to get it right on the park?
Well, you think I'm going to answer a stupid question like that?
I'm only asking it.
Well,
Could
I
you
told
do
you earlier I wouldn't be answering it. And make sure that that's cut. And I'll tell you something. Don't ever...
Offer me that again is the rest of the quote there from the former Dundee United chairman Jim McLean, taking a rather aggressive approach when he was asked about the future of his manager Alex Smith by a BBC reporter all those years ago. Thank you to friend of the Ramble Moon for sending us that clip. I spoke about that moment. I can't remember when it was. Fairly recent. It might have been on Ramble Uncut, or maybe the mailbag or something. So it was nice for Moon to mop up there and bring it to light once again for everybody to enjoy, if that's the right word. You can become a friend of the Ramble too by heading over to patreon.com/Football Ramble. You'll get access to the Discord where you can chat with us and other Ramble listeners and get ad-free episodes of the Ramble up front and on the continent. And a reminder that if you want to get in touch with your stories, questions for the mailbag, or in response to anything at all, then email us show@footballramble.com. That's show@footballramble.com. Thank you very much for everybody who got in touch after Saturday's mailbag, by the way. Jake and Carlos's question on the Discord about supporting two clubs really struck a chord, and we've had loads of messages about that. We've also had this email from Peter Gatti, who said, just listen to the mailbag episode. Great list of nicknames for football teams, but you missed what I think is Italy's best nickname. Chievo Verona is the Flying Donkeys.
Yes.
We did miss that. It was poor of us. Extra detail on... Chievo. Fans of their rivals, Hellas Verona, would say that donkeys would fly before Chievo played in Serie A, but after Chievo were promoted to Serie A in 2001, the Chievo fans started to call themselves the Flying Donkeys. So it's a fairly new nickname. I didn't actually realise that. But that's the kind of good stuff you get with the mailbag. So do make sure you give it your attention, which is released on Saturday mornings. So yes, we will bring you some of the responses that we had to that question about supporting two different teams on this coming Saturday's mailbag as well. So get your ears around that when it comes out. Now, back to this week and what's been going on in the Prem. Leicester City announced on Sunday afternoon that Steve Cooper had been sacked. 5 months in charge is all he lasted for. Of course, replacing Enzo Maresca, who would see him off ultimately with Chelsea's 2-1 win at the King Power. And it's cheerio to Steve Cooper again, Jimmy. Obviously at Forest, he was sacked there. The fans were sad to see him go. I don't think the Leicester City fans will be sad to see him go, though.
Possibly because the Forest fans were so sad to see him go, and maybe they never quite took to him, did they, because of that situation? Obviously,
the lack of points.
And the lack of points. But also the very, very little time to kind of really form a relationship with the manager he's almost parachuted in, because obviously Maresca's gone to Chelsea. Yeah. It's a weird situation for any manager to be taking over a promoted club before the start of a season with very short notice. So you are onto a bit of a hide into nothing there.
Yeah. And a promoted club who had such a distinct style under Maresca as well.
Which, I mean, I think we spoke about it on Friday, didn't we? And you seemed worried for Stevie Cooper, to give you your credit. I think it does make sense for them to be a bit more pragmatic with a different manager coming in, but it's still been very, very difficult for them. And I wonder if they've looked back to when they were last relegated, where they stuck with Brendan Rodgers for a long, long time.
They did.
Dean Smith had 8 games to turn it around, and obviously couldn't, because that's a very, very tough remit. And I wonder if actually they've gone, this isn't working. Let's sort it out now.
Yeah, I think
have 6 managers this season if we have to.
I think that's it, Jim. I think that's the sort of the nail on the head. I mean, Andy, in The Athletic, they did a piece on Leicester, and this was before the Chelsea game, and they said, at this point of the season, if you look at the last, I think it was 7 seasons in the Premier League they took, the points tally Leicester had, how many teams survived with that points tally? I think it was only 2. It was very low, very low. And
although I would say maybe that's not strictly relevant, because it's about surviving in this season's Premier League.
Well, of course.
I don't think it's going to take a ton of points.
Well, yeah, but Andy, I would counteract that and remind people what I said on Friday. If you look around this season's Premier League, well, who are the teams they're going to usurp? I mean, you could see something from Ipswich, right? I think Ipswich will be in a relegation scrap, but
Yeah.
if someone, if it comes to it and they survive, I don't think we'd be that shocked because in McKenna they've got a great manager and they've shown a bit of something. Southampton, despite just being edged by Liverpool, we expect them to be in a relegation scrap. Palace, you think, will improve. Wolves, my goodness, what a win they got. You think they improved. And then above them, Everton, West Ham, Bournemouth, Manchester United. Where are the crap teams this year? You know what I mean? And so that's why I feared for Leicester in this. And I think, they've obviously done the sums. They've looked at the data and they've looked at where they are in the reality of the situation. They've gone, right, sod it. We've got to go. Why didn't they do it before the international break? Well, goodness knows what happens with conversations behind closed doors. Maybe the managers they've got, the manager they've got lined up, which we assume is either, if the reports are to be true, Van Nistelrooy or Graham Potter are the front runners. Maybe they couldn't take over for whatever reason. I don't know, but they've done it now, given Steve Cooper one last chance, and it hasn't happened. So I kind of it's harsh, and I feel sorry for Cooper because I think he's a decent bloke and all that sort of stuff,
and obviously a very good manager as well.
Indeed,
it's an unfortunate point on his CV.
Yeah, and I hope he kind of recovers in a Premier League context with this Cooper.
I think he will.
I think he is better because the two jobs he's had with Forest, it was a reluctant sacking, but the fact is they survived, and now look at them. So you've got to hold your hands up and say, well, they made the right choice. And with Leicester, time will tell. But I understand it from Leicester's point of view why they've done it.
Yeah, and I think that stigma of being sacked as a coach is very much sort of old school thinking, really, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe.
As Carlo Ancelotti said like a week and a half ago, when you get fired, it's just part of being a manager, isn't it? And for Carlo Ancelotti to say that.
A week and a half ago, I won the Champions League, lads.
Yeah.
There's a load of Real Madrid managers go, I know what you mean. Don't worry about it. Don't take it personally.
Let's form the world's biggest support group. But I think the thing that you said there is absolutely right, because if you're having to look around at who are the crap teams who are going to finish below us in the Premier League, you're probably one of those crap teams.
Exactly.
I think that's the thing. And if I was to say anything in defence of Steve Cooper, really, what is he meant to do with that squad? They are one of the weakest squads in the division. And, I know like Leicester fans will say, well, he could have changed the lineup if Stefan Mavididi would have started, if Jordan Ayew would start more. Okay, fair enough. But we're talking about little drops in the well there. They're a team that, if you take that Chelsea game at the weekend, of course they lose to Chelsea. Chelsea have much better players than them. And obviously they didn't help themselves out. But, if you look at, say, the mistakes that Wout Fast made for the opening goal, I mean, if you're hanging your defence around him, you're going to have a massive problem, really, on the way he's played since he's arrived in England and on the way he's played for Belgium over the last couple of years. He's just not of the level, I'm afraid to say, and that's where Leicester are at the moment. I think the thing that would concern me more if I was a Leicester fan is, one, the sacking's not really a surprise because since quite an early stage, they were thinking, have we made a mistake here? And, there was a question mark over Cooper, a sense that he didn't really mesh with the players. And I think the Maresca thing, you're right to point out, is difficult because, Fulham have been in this situation, haven't they, Marcus? In the fact that you played dazzling football in the Championship. Is it actually possible to do that when you've got limited resources in the Premier League compared to the biggest and even the medium-sized teams in it? And I think the other thing is that the thing I'd be really worried about is they clearly don't have an idea of the type of coach and the type of philosophy that they want, because you're looking at the candidates. Potter, okay, fair enough, he nearly took the job before Cooper, and that would have been an interesting choice. But there's an ideals coach, and then you've got David Moyes, who's something completely different.
Now you're talking.
Van Nistelrooy, whose candidacy seems to be he beat Leicester twice in a couple of weeks.
Get him in.
Yeah,
I'd love it if that was their
thinking. They just lose constantly by that logic.
No, maybe it's a reverse. Sort of thing. Maybe it's like a double negative.
If he's our coach, he can't beat us. Seems to be the feeling there. So I'm not convinced there's really the strategy there. Jim talked about, say City going and changing things in January. We know Leicester aren't really able to do that. I just think whether Cooper's the right man for the job or not, well, whatever. I think at this point, this isn't going to stick with him because it looks like the board have done something daft rather than him. And I don't see how he could have done it any better. Seriously, name me the coach that is going to stop them getting relegated. I would love to hear it.
Well, okay, so I mean, Van Nistelrooy is a gamble in terms of not. Well, okay, he has managed in the Premier League, but he's inexperienced.
Yeah.
David Moyes, it will be a very pragmatic approach. Graham Potter, you would think Potter would need time to kind of get his sort of philosophy and all that kind of stuff, and maybe some signings.
It'd be a very risky one for Potter.
Yeah, exactly, Jim. Why would you take it if you were Potter? You've been out of the game for long enough that the next job that Potter takes is really important if he wants to keep his reputation. I think you look at Leicester, you look at the resources, and you think, I don't know what I can do with this.
So you think it would be more suited for, say, David Moyes of those three, because they are the three front runners?
Quite frankly, that is quite a miserable prospect for their supporters.
That's harsh on Moyes, isn't it? Come on.
No, because I don't think he can succeed there, and I don't think the football's going to be any good. So that feels like a miserable 3/4 of season to me.
So are you saying that they should pull the Big Sam cord? Is it time? Is it time to give that man a little bit of time?
As far as we know, the cord is still operational. So it's been a while since
it has.
There's been a test of it, but
my goodness,
if not now, when?
Yeah. Okay. Well, presumably one of the sides that will be in a relegation battle with presumably Leicester. A lot of presumptions going on here. Are Southampton, and they were so close to getting a result against Liverpool. They lost 3-2, of course, at home. But ultimately, Liverpool win again.
You look at that when Southampton go 2-1 up with a brilliant goal.
Brilliant goal.
Really was.
Adam Armstrong's
was.
turn basically fools three players.
Yeah.
And three very, very good elite level players as well. So amazing stuff. And you think, have Liverpool put their Southampton voucher through the wash here? But no.
But Slot found it like a tissue you've left in your pocket in the washing machine.
Just in time.
There it is! Quick! Ooh.
Yeah. Liverpool are getting to the point now. We're all seeing the stats going around about sort of Leeds at this part of the season and comparisons with kind of Klopp's Liverpool at their best.
Leeds with an A.
Yes. Where actually, a few more wins or a few more kind of leaps away from everybody else, and it would be kind of unprecedented for them to not win it.
Just hand them the title now, Jim.
Well, indeed. But it is. Slot hasn't been there for very long, and one of the most important things about how you approach a Premier League season is a test of mental strength and of character. And this is exactly the sort of game where they've passed that with flying colours. It's a team you should beat, but you find yourself losing against them, and that can bring its own pressures and can make players sort of play within themselves a bit. But they just keep going, don't they? They just keep going, and they're confident they're going to win, and then they do.
Well, then they do. They were given a bit of a helping hand by Southampton.
Oh God,
a bit.
Get out,
interesting.
Southampton. I'm with Luke on this now. Fuck off. But what are you doing here? You're no help to anyone else. You're no help to yourselves. What's the point?
Dear. That was on behalf of all Arsenal fans and other teams that are hoping for a title tilt. Dear. Yeah, I mean, that first goal, that is symptomatic of what could happen if you want to play out from the back and you don't want to bloody hoof it.
Is it though?
Andy.
I don't think.
Okay, if you want to play out from the back and at times you're not that good at it.
Yeah, look, I think you
and
can
you're playing against a much better side.
I think you can separate the concept of playing out from the back and not doing what they did on that first goal.
I think they've got to revert to long ball.
I don't really think that's the message to take.
I think the traditionalists among us have been proved right again.
Well, the thing is, because the pass that led to Szoboszlai's goal wasn't even the first, pass that was under pressure in that little period of play. There were ample opportunities to go, you know what, there's too many of them around us here, let's get rid of this.
Lovely finish from Szoboszlai.
Yeah, that's it. The Szoboszlai finish was so good. It was almost one of those finishes that you see in NBA when the whistle's gone and you think, I'll try a 3-pointer from half court. It's it doesn't really matter. It's completely decontracted because it's can this be real? Because that was not the sort of passage of play that normally happens in a Premier League game that directly preceded it. There was almost a sort of decontraction to that finish. I mean, it's of course, the unstoppable Mo Salah narrative at the moment of he must get his money and they must sign him and they must give him as long as a contract as he wants and all this other stuff because he's on this incredible run of form at the moment, and he is. But but it didn't feel, and that must be the infuriating thing for Russell Martin, a man who feels like relatively close to the edge most of the time anyway. The fact that they do so much good stuff against Liverpool, and then Salah didn't even have to be great in this game.
No, he didn't.
Actually, I mean, they just gave him the goals.
Well, I mean, it wasn't Ramsdale in goal. It was Alex
McCarthy,
who's a decent keeper.
Yeah,
not in this game, unfortunately.
No, he wasn't, and hasn't been playing that much. And that goal, I mean, you're right to credit Salah, of course, but it is a big misjudgment from the keeper.
Yeah, but it's a clever finish to capitalise on that misjudgment. It can be both at once, can't it?
Yeah. It can be, but I'm looking at the goalkeeper more, to be honest. And it was a sickler because, again, they go 2-1 up. The stadium is pumping. They're playing well. And then to just give away a goal like that, it's so deflating. And then, of course, the penalty. And it was a shame because they looked like they were having something. I mean, the vicar of Dibbling, Andy, if you will, was having a lovely game. Shame for them. But they lost ultimately. And Liverpool, who host Man City at Anfield on Sunday, march on. Now,
they'll be licking their lips.
Well, but could it be that... So when a team's on a bad run... And you think, now they're going to be hammered by, and you kind of go, it's like a 1-1 draw or something. Maybe this is in a weird way, the perfect game for Man City coming up against.
Yeah. You think because I tend to look at this and thinking this Southampton game is the perfect warm up for Liverpool to gratefully receive some really basic mistakes and take advantage of them.
Quite possibly. Well, we will talk about that game, of course, when we preview it on Friday's show. But yes, Liverpool march on quite happy. I say march on; they plod along. I think
cartwheel on.
Yeah, mate. I think they're plodding.
You think?
And I think that's served them incredibly well. I mean, at times there's a march, at times there's a plod. They're just going through the motions, nice and easy, lads, and they're 8 points clear. For crying out loud. So they just need to keep doing what they're doing while everyone is buggering up. Right, coming up after this, Ruben Amorim's first game in charge of Manchester United. And yes, Matheus Cunha, what an afternoon he had at Craven Cottage. Ipswich Town 1, Manchester United 1. What a start, though, for Ruben Amorim's Manchester United, Jim.
Yeah, it was a worrying start, wasn't it? For those of us who enjoy Man United failing. Like,
God, 5 or 6. So
what? You're thinking straight away, you're thinking the worst. You think, all right, they're playing 3-4-3. Interesting that he's gone with that straight away. Oh, Diallo as a sort of wing back. That could work. Oh, Rashford as a centre forward. Both of those things are a little bit different. Let's see how that's worked. Oh, it's worked. fuck. But actually, fantastically, it didn't pan out that way, did it? Although... Immediately, Peter Drury, his commentary on this was, it's Rashford, it's utopian. It's like, we all feared this, didn't we? We all feared that there might be too much of a good thing. It feels like someone has to have a word now. It's not utopian. It's a goal against Ipswich.
I still believe in Peter. I believe in the man. And I'm glad he's still there, Jim. Ipswich are the better side, Andy. You would say on the balance. Andre Onana made a couple of great saves. And
really great saves.
Yeah, kept them in the game. Ruben Amorim, though, is the man at the centre of it all, of course. I spoke about Amorim being like a good fit. This is something that they haven't really tried before. This is a longer-term approach. And I suggested that the pressure's kind of off him slightly in a way that it wasn't for previous managers, because I think Manchester United, they know that they've tried this, that and the other and it hasn't worked. What we need is a longer term plan, and you think that Jurgen Klopp took a little bit of time to get going at Liverpool. You could say the same for Guardiola at Manchester City, actually, and you could certainly say the same with Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, to use those examples. They will want that, of course, if it is a bit of a slow start. I think, right, you've got to show something at some point. But how do you think in these early stages how do you see this playing out maybe in the next few months? Not necessarily in terms of results, but in terms of what he may do personnel-wise and who he might bring in and all that, because a lot's been made of his system, for example.
Yeah, and I think his recall actually on his Sky interview that it's not to do with the system, it's to do with the players being empowered to interpret it with greater confidence and greater competence. I think for him to point that out is not wrong. We're just so used to the way that coaches face the media and say, oh, well, you can't criticise my players. I can criticise my players, but you can't criticise my players.
Yeah.
That idea that you've got to protect them to the hilt and everything stays in the dressing room. I don't think that's really realistic in modern football, because people have great football literacy. They are flooded with football media the whole time, and they can see what's going on. You can't treat people like idiots by saying, yeah, everything's fine. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And I think for him to have that open dialogue will actually buy him a little bit more time. I think he's a really great, really calm communicator. That's always been one of his cornerstones. And he probably doesn't feel that panic because A, he knows, as you say, that he's got quite a long leash. And B, because he's been through it before at Sporting. He's picking Manchester United up in a very similar situation to what he did with Sporting, in that they were in a mess on and off the pitch, and he knew it would take time to come around. So I suppose you can compare it a little bit to Xabi Alonso at Leverkusen as well, the fact that he took over this team that were in the relegation zone. And I remember talking to Alonso about this last year, and he said, look, you can have your philosophy when you go in, but you have to work in stages.
Yeah.
You can't produce all the football you want on day one. You have to have a plan to make yourself competitive. Then you have a sort of team that's going to help you get results. Then you start moving into something where you're going to dominate games. But the domination phase, which is where Sporting have got to by the end, that's quite a long way off.
Yeah.
And not only does Amorim know that, but anyone with eyes who watches Manchester United knows that. So I think how he discussed that his players need to learn, I think was really useful, really interesting.
And he did say that his players were thinking too much as well, which was quite interesting. When he knows that this is a process and he knows that it's going to take time.
Yeah.
I did like his comments about Mason Mount, though.
Yes.
I love this kid. And he said he's going to fit well in my system. I've got a couple of positions that he's going to like this.
Which should be nice, actually, wouldn't it? Because
Yeah.
you've been worried about Mount and Man United as a fit for a long time.
Yeah.
Perhaps things will shift around so that he is a really, really good fit there.
You just forget what a great player
Yeah,
Mason Mount
absolutely.
is.
Yeah,
I
he's been
missed
very,
him.
very unlucky with injuries, isn't he? And also not quite fitting into a system in a very chaotic environment. I also thought it was interesting that he brought on Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee together. He's clearly, trying to see what he's got from the assets he has available to him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't a particularly great game to watch, was it? It wasn't that thrilling. Obviously, Omari Hutchinson's goal was brilliant and the highlight of the whole thing. But yeah, it was kind of a lot of what we've seen before, just slightly differently shaped. But as you say, it could be a couple of seasons before we see what Amorim actually really wants.
Something that we hadn't seen for a while is Luke Shaw playing.
Yes,
And he came on in the 56th minute.
he answered the call
Come on then.
of duty.
Hey, that's it, Andy. Get him back in there.
Yeah, definite plus. But I think Shaw is one of the ones, funnily enough, if he's fit, that you need to least worry about.
Yeah.
Because you know what you're going to get from him, because he could play wing back, he could play third centre back, something that Mazraoui, that I think is an indication of the fact that he's going to make do and mend in the short term, because Mazraoui is I don't think massively cut out for that, to be honest, and I guess we'll see going forward. But I think Matheus de Ligt's performance really underlined to me, and probably underlined to Ruben Amorim, one of his major things. Like, again, when he said to Roy Keane that it's not really about the system, that's just a framework. What he has to work on more than anything, and what any Manchester United manager would have to work on more than anything, is for a number of years now, they have made good players worse. And that's what they need to work on. De Ligt looked all over the place. I mean, by the way, Liam Delap played him superbly. He was fantastic. And De Ligt, who, I think there were people in Munich who would argue that he was Bayern's best defender, and it was a financial necessity to sell him. I'm not completely against that opinion, but he's already stepped in and looked a worse version of himself. But in terms of player development, that's where Amorim's real value is, rather than imposing any particular system, because that's what United have struggled with for ages. And, there's tons of raw talent, absolutely tons of raw talent there.
Well, you said it wasn't the most inspiring of games. Perhaps what was going off the field was more interesting, and we heard there was a fire alarm that went off at Stockley Park, so there was no VAR available for the end of the first half. Both managers agreed to continue. I'd have loved it if we saw some things off the ball and all that kind of stuff. Imagine that. That would have caused a bit of a shock. And then in the post-match, Amorim himself came out, and it was interesting to hear him talk, and Ed Sheeran appeared.
Yeah, it was a weird bit of TV, that, wasn't it? Because it was just
When
a
you
lot
say
of-
weird, you mean shite.
Yeah, there was a lot of people. I know we're on dodgy ground here, but there was
Yeah.
a lot of people interrupting each other and laughing at their own jokes. But yeah, it was absolute chaos, wasn't it? He just pops up though, Ed, doesn't he?
Is it Ed's fault? That's what I want to know. And I know you don't know the answer to that. But a producer has either said to him, Ed, just go over there, even though you don't have a mic and Amorim's talking, and it's interesting because he's the new Manchester United manager and we're getting an insight here, but just go over there and introduce yourself so they all know you're here. Or has Ed gone, I think we're going to wander over there and say hello to everybody. It seems unlikely that Ed Sheeran has done that because presumably people off camera will be going, go away, what are you doing? So I think he's been stitched up there.
Does he have the freedom of the city of Ipswich? If anyone does, it's probably him. So maybe that's how that works.
I'd like to
And
think
you can
though
just
that
go wherever you like.
Yeah, but I'd like to think though that football pitches are sacrosanct.
Not if you've got the freedom of the city, mate.
Well,
They give you a big key
yeah, that's true.
and you can go anywhere you like.
Well, I think he's proved that, hasn't he?
Yeah. Also, there was a weird thing at the start of the second half where there was just a lot of growling, just coming from the fans.
Was that between Roy Keane and a couple of
No,
supporters?
well, that happened after the game as well. It was
Right,
very
maybe-
eventful, wasn't it? But
okay,
there was
yeah.
just, you could hear from the stands a lot of people just growling.
maybe
It
that's
was quite a piratey growl.
interesting. Well, Roy Keane was, of course, punditing on Sky and told an Ipswich fan to wait for him in the car park. Presumably he was giving him a lift home or something. I don't know.
Or, ring around the local hospital, see how that man's getting on.
All right then. We're going to finish with this. Here you go, Wolves fans. Well done. Fulham 1, Wolves 4.
Lovely pointless goal from Iwobi, wasn't it?
Didn't seem pointless at the time. I had a perfect angle of that where I
Wow.
sit as well. When Fulham went 1-0 up, I thought to myself, I tell you what, they could go on and maybe win this 2 or 3 kind of thing. How wrong I was.
Well, Raul Jimenez hit the bar very early on, didn't he, from close range?
That was at 0-0, so they scored quite soon after that. But you're right. I mean, Fulham was so kind of dominant without creating too much, but they've obviously scored, but they were very much on top. The whole game was being played in the Wolves half. And then Matheus Cunha suddenly turned into flipping Dennis Bergkamp or something.
I love it when Brazilian players specifically do this because it's like some of them have a Brazil button they can just press.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm just going to score now, and there's however difficult it is, I'm just going to do it, and there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Yeah.
I love for his first goal the way he changes pace once he gets into the box with the ball at his feet is absolutely magnificent. He's already really, really running at some speed, but then he needs that little extra yard, and he gives it to himself. It's a brilliant goal.
It is a brilliant goal, and the way Mario Lemina, or Mario Junior, as he's got on the back of his shirt, just pings that ball over the top. You kind of go, yeah, they do have quality.
Yeah.
They do have a bit
So
of quality
much.
in this squad, and they shouldn't be where they are in terms of personnel, of course. But a great goal, and then in the second half, I Wolves deserve a lot of credit because they disrupted Fulham's midfield, and whatever Gary O'Neill said to them at half-time, it worked. And they got their chances, they put them away. They went 2-1 up. Okay, Joachim Anderson going off injured when Fulham had already made their subs.
I mean, is that the first time in the era of 5 substitutes that we've seen that happen?
Oh, maybe. It's a rare thing. It is a rare thing, but it showed you how concerned Silva was about Fulham not getting a foothold back in the game and perhaps not going on to get an equalising goal, that he thought, I have to really kind of change this up. So again, credit to Wolves, and they made that extra man really count. And when Cunha that second goal of his is just a beauty. You just go, yeah, that's that, isn't it? It's Wolves' afternoon, but he was just. I mean, we talk about Kulusevski being one of the best players in the league. Cunha was one of the best players of the weekend in European football, I would go as far to say, because the goals were superb and the assist as well. It was a great afternoon for them, and I know they've got back-to-back wins now, but they've been waiting a while for the wins to come.
Well, they're unbeaten in 4 now. Last time they lost was to Man City, which on reflection is quite embarrassing for Wolves. But it's a good run. And I'm pleased with Gary O'Neill because he absolutely had to put this run together after they had a run of tricky fixtures, and he's done it.
And that's an important point to make as well, because yes, you can talk about tough starts and all that kind of stuff. Well, when you get the games that are more winnable and you don't do it, the pressure comes as well. So yeah, they're out the relegation zone on goal difference against Ipswich, but you would think with Wolves that they would want to start looking up the table, but it will take a few more fixtures. I mean, the Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham, Ipswich, Leicester, And then, well, depending on where Man United are, they've got Man United next. That's the run you're talking about. They've started that run well. They want to now kick on and do it. So there we are. They didn't ruin my afternoon because I have perspective, but it was a great win for those away fans at the Craven Cottage. It's now called.
It does feel like Wolves having an overdue opportunity to enjoy themselves a little bit. Because that win against Southampton, as you say, there was so much riding on it. They just had to find their way through it and made sure they won it whichever way they could. It wasn't a particularly dazzling performance, and probably in terms of fluency, like maybe one of their weaker ones this season. But I think it's because of the enormity of the game really weighed on them, and it felt like that weight had been lifted a little bit. I mean, as you said, with Cunha, he's got the ability to go and win them pretty much any game.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that by his whole body language, the way he plays the game. It's like, yeah, I can be the best player on this team. Actually, I could probably be the best player on most teams. And he's always been looking for that team where he can be that player.
And when he does that gives him such confidence.
Yeah,
and you think,
totally.
right, now go and do that week in, week out now. You've got a run of games now against teams in which you will get chances, you will get space. Go and do it.
Totally. And you're right to underline Lamina as well, because it's something, I don't know how much credit Gary O'Neill will get for it, but it's something we're seeing increasingly from coaches across European football, that idea of, rather than having someone who just breaks opposition players in half playing in the deepest midfield role, someone who can actually pass the ball.
Well, he was at the back.
That makes a massive difference.
He was playing
yeah,
at the back.
he's like a sweeper, basically. Wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was.
So a similar thing, which is basically the same thing, because if you sort of play with, it turns into a three, doesn't it? It's like Busquets for Barcelona. It's a similar thing. But that idea of using a sort of playmaker in that deeper role as someone to, it helps you break the lines of a press really easily, doesn't it? So, maybe that's the best way around that. We've seen Liverpool doing that with Gravenberch this season as well. So it looks like it's the way forward for a lot of coaches.
Yeah, I think as well, to have a player at the back who can, or deeper, depending on where they are, to kind of spread the ball around a bit more. It's one of the reasons why Fulham wanted to sign Joachim Andersen, who of course, as I say, was taken off. But there we are. Well done, Wolves, and off they go.